I would like to talk to you today about our role on this earth as creators, and how that precious ability to create has often come at the cost of the destruction of the landscapes that we inhabit. I want to talk about the mindsets behind this destructive power, and then quickly move on to something more positive, a way of looking at our role from creator into healer of the spaces that we live in. Because how beautiful would it be if the lands that we live end up thriving because of our presence, rather than being exploited or depleted? What if we treat nature as a collaborator rather than a commodity? Let me tell you where this all started. I grew up in the Netherlands in a man-made world, where people decided what was going to be where, for how long, and what purpose. I grew up in an artificially created landscape without realizing that I did. Even caring for nature was about ticking off boxes, harvesting wood, drinking water, and in that landscape, frogs still lived, plants were still growing, and I was playing in the mud, feeling deeply connected to nature. I didn't really feel this distinct barrier between what was me and what was the natural world. But that perspective changed one day, on one of my first flights over the Netherlands, seeing the absolute destruction of our natural landscape from above. And I thought, this can't be right. This can't be the earth that I love so much and I feel so deeply part of. Playing in the mud became my profession, as I went from building sandcastles to being a designer and a ceramicist. But that also quickly came with the realization that my urge to create comes at a cost, resources, from that landscape. Making has often been destructive. We harvest, we use, we build, we take, we discard, often without realizing the ecological systems we disrupt when doing so. So I went looking for an alternative. And don't get me wrong, I understand why we had to start micromanaging the landscape, because we're a very densely populated country. But I was interested to understand the narratives and the motives behind the choices we make when we make them on behalf of nature. So I studied a social design master's at the Design Academy of Eindhoven, where I looked into the way that religion, belief systems, and spirituality shape the way we think culturally about nature. Because I believe that the way you think about something is deeply tied to the way you subconsciously act towards it. I looked into the way how one particularly popular religion in the Netherlands has given people a sense of superiority over nature. Like they had the right to use and consume all natural entities as if resources, as if a commodity, instead of recognizing that they are themselves part of this same system. And how has that impacted nature maintenance, the way we care for nature? Let me show you two examples. So on one hand, you have stewardship, an attitude that says we know best what to do. We can steer nature into the direction that we think is right, and thereby robbing natural entities of their tendencies to evolve. We're in control. And on the other hand, you have something like rewilding, which kind of says the opposite. You put a big fence around somewhere, and all nature inside of that fence can roam wild. People are not allowed. What that directly implies is that humans are not recognized as part of that same system. We're dangerous. We should stay away. What it also doesn't take into account is the context, which in the Netherlands means all nature has been directly or indirectly impacted by human influence. So you could argue that rewilding in this context could be seen as a form of neglect. So I propose something in the middle. Land allyship. Land allyship means raising the voices of those lesser heard or underrepresented. in my case, plants, animals, fungi, and collaborating with them. It means changing our role from that forceful creator and user into a listener or a facilitator. But how do you collaborate with a plant? To try land allyship out, I took care of this land for a year and a half. It's 1 acre just outside of Eindhoven. And for that land, I designed a series of tools that people could use to relate to the land in an effort to collectively take care of it. But the tools were designed in a way that the other, nature, had to show up in order for the tools to work. Otherwise, it's not collaborating. I'll give you an example. This is a molehill tool. It's designed to collaborate with the mole. How you use it is that you sow seeds in an area where a molehill has been made. And so for a year, I followed the mole around and sowed flower seeds in places where molehills had been formed, meaning that by the end of the year, it was the mole that designed where flowers would grow. Similarly, I invited a flock of sheep over and created a series of fences and open structures. The sheep could graze open zones and paths, meaning it was the sheep in the end who designed the places where people could walk and where they couldn't. I then used the wool of those sheep in a process called solar dyeing, which means you use plants from the land and the power of the sun to dye the wool color. That wool was then used, together with a community, to be braided. All of this was one big experiment to see how you could collectively take care of nature, how you could design differently, collaborating with the land, but most of all, how people could feel like a participant in this large system of beings again, rather than a user or an observer. Entering the land, you were greeted with these large arches of willows. They were newly planted, so they needed a post, and the post served a double function. There were these hooks where you could put your shoes upon, and this small box where you could lock your phone away, meaning that if you entered the land, maybe barefoot, you were really able to truly connect to that place instead of some digital realm elsewhere. So most of all, it was a place that was really designed for people to connect to nature again, like I did as a child. You might wonder, so how did it go? Did you fail? Did you succeed? Well, I think I did both. I succeeded at pulling it off, and I failed at a lot of other goals I set myself out to reach. But I realized that that is exactly the point of collaborating with nature. That you need to be open to the fact that things will go very differently than planned because maybe your collaborator steered the project into another direction. The land has evolved from a formerly agricultural plot to somewhat of a young forest and a wildflower meadow. I have since given the role of caretaker back to the rightful owner, and recently ran into somebody who used to go there when I still took care of it. And they told me they still go there secretly, jump over the fence, as a way to connect to nature, because it's become a safe space for them. Meaning, in the end, it might have not really been about regenerating the land to my principles, but for me to facilitate a space for safe connection. I still work with the land allyship methodology today, starting every single project thinking, how can I be a land ally? How can I collaborate with nature rather than see it as a commodity? How can my projects give back? How can we leave the spaces we work with healthier, better than we found them? Which means that I can't always make what I want. I can't always take and harvest what I would like. It's a constant battle between my urge to create and my respect for the environments that I collaborate with. But in order to feel that way, I need to feel like I'm less superior and part of this bigger network. But how do I practice that? How do we all practice that? Feeling a participant of this large network of beings, which we are, which requires that we need to feel spaces to be a land ally, get our hands dirty. What it requires of us, basically, is to roam in the mud, befriend frogs, and feel what it's like to be part of this big web of beings that we will never fully control and that we will never fully understand. Thank you.